As I said, I'm Zachary Bowman here at the Samuel Dorsky Museum of Art. We are so excited to be hosting the exhibition Kathy Goodell Infra-Loop Selections 1994 to 2020, curated by the wonderful Andrew Paul Woolbright. What's going to happen today is I'll introduce Andrew briefly, who will introduce Kathy, who really needs no introduction, as you all know. And we have a video that'll be playing while they're talking so that you'll see what they're speaking about from the show. So Andrew Woolbright is an artist, curator, and critic based in Brooklyn, New York, and is an MFA graduate from the Rhode Island School of Design in painting. Woolbright founded and directs the gallery Super Duchess, located on the Lower East Side in New York. In addition to curating, he writes for Momus, Two Coats of Paint, and White Hot Magazine. In 2022, Woolbright will be curating an exhibit based on his writing on phantom bodies with Vacancy Gallery in Shanghai. He has previously taught at Rhode Island School of Design and currently teaches here at SUNY New Paltz. So welcome, Andrew, welcome, Kathy, welcome everybody. I'm gonna start our video.
Thank you so much, Zach. And to reiterate, thank you all of you who are attending here on a Sunday. And with that, I'm thrilled and honored to introduce to Kathy Goodell, who, as Zach said, doesn't need an introduction, but let's go for it. Kathy was born in San Francisco and attended the San Francisco Art Institute, where she received both her BFA and MFA in sculpture. Her professors include the likes of Jay DeFeo, Jim Nutt, and Frank Owen. Goodell has been the recipient of grants and awards from the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation in 2013, the Bow Institute, the Camargo Foundation, the David and Julia White Artist Colony, the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and the Pollock Krasner Foundation, as well as receiving a Fulbright Hayes Fellowship. We would also like to thank the Foundation for Contemporary Arts for awarding Kathy an emergency grant to help support this very exhibition. She has exhibited extensively, both nationally and internationally, including major exhibitions at the New York Public Library, the Queen's Art Center, the Berkeley Museum, and has been included in major group exhibitions at the Los Angeles Institute of Contemporary Art, the Boise Art Museum, the Virginia Museum of Contemporary Art, Mendel Art Museum, and the Drawing Center in New York. She exhibited with Willoughby Sharp Gallery, a gallery located at 8 Spring Street in the Bowery that ran from 1988 to 1991, and was part of a scene of artists that included the likes of Hannah Wilke, Judy Linares, Elizabeth King, and Robert Crumb. Goodell's work has been reviewed in the Huffington Post, Hyperallergic, Juxtapose Magazine, and Avalanche Magazine, an epical artist journal published from 1970 to 1976 that include the work of Joseph Beuys, Vito Acconci, and many of the artists we now consider to be historical figures. She has taught at UC Davis, San Francisco State University, the San Francisco Art Institute, Moore College of Art, the School of Visual Arts here in New York, and is currently a professor here at SUNY New Paltz. This exhibition has been planned for over 3 years now, and I would have to guess that we did 2 or 3 studio visits a month over the course of that time, so I can't even count how many studio visits that is and how much time we spent talking about this exhibition. And as many exhibitions happen, it could have taken many forms. It could have played the hits from Kathy's career. It could have focused more on her sculpture, could have been entirely painting. And it could have been set up some type of relationship between West Coast and East Coast. But ultimately, through many conversations, we became interested in something we both noticed, which was this continual loop that kept happening within her work, a consistent return, this mirroring reflection that kept happening and spanned between years, spanned between sculpture and video and installation and drawings. And like the infrarealists of Mexico, who wanted to get at a submerged, unseen, platonic, real version of what reality was, we felt or I felt as a curator, we were really trying to find this submerged loop that was withheld from us, but we both sensed and felt within her practice, this like thing that she kept returning to, that in many ways formed the structure behind all of her work. And so that's where the title of the exhibition came from, this Infra-Loop, that looking at this work, we see work from the 90s and 2020 in the same room together, and we see those mirrored reflections and echoes and ripples that are showing themselves across different mediums and dimensions. I also feel it's my job as curator to make an argument for this show, for why now. Even though we've been planning this exhibition for 3 years, why does this show need to happen right now in 2021? And I personally believe it's because Kathy herself poses a real feminist critique to the patriarchal canon, not just aesthetically and through her identity and through her practice, but also in this incredibly wonderful dimensional artistic practice that she's maintained throughout her entire life. That is interdisciplinary and experimental, and those words get thrown around a lot to a place where they don't really have meaning anymore. But she really is radically that. And as we get into like feminism of the early aughts that talks about transcorporeality, there's the writings of Zygmunt Bauman that said, that was in search of liquid modernities, as we put it, to counteract and critique the solid structures of the past, the patriarchal canon. And Kathy herself is always challenging that. Just when you think she could consistently make sculpture for the rest of her life, she shifts to painting and drawing and installation. And she might very well go back to sculpture. And I would argue as the art world is shifting, post-COVID, as we are all trying to like find and shrinking in a lot of ways and finding what the art world should be like and the industry should be like, Kathy is presenting something that needs to be acknowledged and recognized, which is an artist who is not trying to go for a singular style, but instead is interested in experimentation and finding poetic moments that exist across many different mediums. So that's my little spiel about Kathy and why I think this show and the kind of the ideas behind it going into it. But that takes us to this piece we're getting to look at right now, which in many ways is the first piece in the exhibition, and kind of the place that we'll keep returning to over and over and over again, which is Conjunctio. And this was the first piece Kathy made when she took the teaching position here at SUNY New Paltz in 1994. And she had spent time living in New York City in the 80s and 90s, but originally came from the West Coast. So I'll open it up now. Kathy, what was that like, transitioning from San Francisco in the 70s, coming to New York in the 80s and 90s, and now you're here taking this position at SUNY New Paltz and making this really wonderful weighted sculpture, Conjunctio?
What was my whole life like? Okay. Thank you, Andrew. So I maybe am going to give a little back history that I'm a third generation Californian. So my grandparents went to California when they were immigrants. They went there at about when they were children. So California is really in my blood. And so we lived in San Francisco, and then at about 10 years old, we moved up to Sacramento, Folsom area. Actually, I should give credit to my father. He was the mayor of Folsom, and he brought Johnny Cash to Folsom for that album. But anyway, so being a Californian, I decided to go to the San Francisco Art Institute. I'd actually gone to Sacramento State for a year, and that's where I studied with Jim Nutt and Frank Owen. And then I went to the Art Institute. They didn't really like to take freshman students. They wanted you to have a little experience before. So, so I went there, and you know, I just want to give a little nod to my dear friends who contributed to the catalog. And Elizabeth King wrote a beautiful essay on San Francisco and our experiences. And Dan Nadell also contextualized all of California. And then there's a wonderful interview with Judy Linares, my dear friend, who explained it all probably much better than I can. So my teachers at the Art Institute were second generation abstract expressionists, and that had its benefits, and I don't want to say it's bad side, but they were pretty dogmatic, and they were passionate about their beliefs. But for instance, there's a Diego Rivera mural, and they built a wall in front of it. And we used to have to climb up on a ladder and utilize the flashlight to see it. So that kind of epitomizes how they were. They really didn't want us to be influenced by representational art. So the scene in San Francisco, it was just really diverse, but also a community. So there's a community of artists, musicians, performers, artists, cartoonists, and we all hung out together. It was really like a little village in a way. For a while, I owned a comic book store in North Beach, together with the filmmaker Terry Zwiegoff. And I was part of a women's support group of dear friends that are still wonderful, active artists. Judy Linares, Phyllis Ideal, Susan Wynn, hi Susan, Louise Stanley, Judy Hudson. And then I started teaching at 22, and I gave up the comic book store. Yeah, and then in 1982, I received an NEA grant, and a lot of my friends had moved to New York. They preceded me, and so when I got this grant, I decided, that I'll be able to move to New York now. And we did that, and we found a loft that was unbelievably affordable. And I don't know, Soho was like a little village at the time. It was so much different than it is now. And you would just meet other artists, during the course of the day. Like this one time I was walking down the street, and the whole street smelled like coffee. And I looked up, and there was Ron Gorchoff, I think, on the 4th floor. And I said, wow, that smells good. And he said, oh, come up for a cup of coffee. And we'd never met. So it was kind of like that, very open. And another funny little tale. So in our building, we had a basement, and Namjoon Paik rented out the basement. Mainly to just store all of his TVs, but he, was working there for a while. He had a few studios, and we used to go have rice and beans on Canal Street. And I remember this one time we went, and Linda Montana came in tied to her performance partner on a 6-foot rope. And this was just kind of how the world was there. We'd run into Basquiat before he was well known on the street selling postcards. It was not at all like it is now, which is kind of like a a giant mall now. And so after I was in New York for a couple of years, I started showing at the Deborah Sharp Gallery and did that for a few years. And then she closed. And then Willoughby Sharp, no relation, just an odd coincidence that my two galleries would be named Sharp, but Willoughby Sharp opened a gallery. And Willoughby was the originator, along with Liza Bear, of Avalanche magazine. And he was largely responsible for bringing Joseph Beuys to this country. And he is quite the character, kind of a Monty Bunt. And we had a long friendship and collaboration. He had, you know, quite a few little pop-up galleries over the years. And, you know, so we had a relationship until he passed. So Conjunctio. So when I got the job at New Paul's, it felt like, I don't know, maybe the first time in my life that, like, where I actually could be a home for a while, that all my other teaching positions had been, you know, kind of 3-year positions, that kind of thing. So I decided it was sort of this really important thing in my life. And there was a piece that I had done way back in, I think, 1979 or 1980, that was an earlier version of Conjunctio, but I was never quite satisfied with it because I felt like the curve wasn't quite right. So I decided to do it over again. But it would be different because I kind of don't believe in repeating myself, but since I never perfected that one, I wanted to do it over again. So at any rate, the way that the curve is made, it has to do with like the weight of each piece of glass and the distance that each piece of glass is apart from the others. And I really didn't have any idea whether this was going to work or not. I just had to go on intuition. So I kind of assessed the sequence and worked on it for like 6 months, and then went to hang it, and it worked. It was the exact curve that I wanted. So that was really made me happy. And I love it when things like that happen. So Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, I love this piece. I remember when we were installing it, you really brought up how the small little space underneath the hang was really what this whole piece is about, or like a very serious moment of like capturing that negative space. And like sculpture that thinks about negative space the way you do is like, I was really blown away by it when I saw images of it. I was really excited about you presenting it again in this exhibition. And also, like, one quick note, you know, so much of Kathy's sculptures that she did in San Francisco and even in New York, they're radical truly in the sense that so many of the materials were ephemeral and done with like blood, and she wasn't going to art supply shops at all. She was like interested in these materials that degraded or fell apart over time, and someone needs to give her the opportunity to show those things again.
Yeah, the two forms, I was trying to think about how the two forms, like being so close to each other too, that has this seductive nature because they're kind of have a movement and they barely touch. At times you might even hear a sound where they do touch. So I was really interested in not only the distance from the floor being dangerously close, but the nature of the two forms levitating one above the other. So when I was conceiving the piece, I had a dream. And the dream, I mean, an actual dream while I was sleeping. I dream a lot in the day, but this is an actual dream that was one of those kind of dreams that you remember the rest of your life. But I was sort of had a sleep paralysis dream where I was prone and there was a female figure above me vibrating very fast and in a ferocity. And that I said to myself, I have to confront this figure to make it go away. So I summoned all my bravery or my guts to confront this figure, and then she stopped. And then as soon as she stopped, a male figure came and started to do the same thing. And so I said to myself again, I have to summon my forces to make this one go away. And so after the dream, I felt like I gained something. I felt like I had stood up to these two threatening forces. And then over the years, I realized that I was making friends with the female and the male parts of myself, kind of trying to bring them together. Sort of an attempt to understand how I could sustain both of those parts in my life. So I always think of art making as a tool to alter you as a person, to make you understand something in the universe a little deeper. So.
And you're really playing with these opposites. And what I think is important about this first piece on the show is it really is kind of a good transition. You're working directly with salt, which is something you'd worked a lot with in San Francisco and New York. And you're interested in these oppositions. And God, that dream's beautiful. Like it totally fills in the missing piece for me as far as like where this thing comes from. You can see it in the work. And it's interesting how you bring up something that comes up a lot within your work is this like alchemy and psychology are two words that you return to a lot when you're naming pieces, when you're thinking through things. Were there any formative experiences that kind of brought those into consideration or research, or what brought you to this deep analysis of these two ideas?
Well, I don't think it was so much from research, although all those things were kind of in the air at the time. Like people were reading Carl Jung, and I can't remember if alchemy was something that maybe a little bit. And the Rivera artists really interested me in their use of materials, probably more than most American sculptors. I was really drawn to that, and I think I was really drawn to that because there is a duality. I'm really attracted to materials and substances, but I don't want them to stand alone. In other words, I'm drawn to them, but I reject the idea that if you, like, for instance, cast something out of bronze, that voila, it's art. It would depend on, what else you did with it. So anyway, my interest in materials, I guess, is very autobiographical, though I kind of didn't recognize that at the time. When I was using blood and salt and all of those materials, it was just instinctual. And then years later, I realized it came out of an experience that I had when I was a young child, because my father is an accountant, but he managed a tanning factory in South San Francisco, and he used to drag me there a lot, and I loved it. It was hides that were stacked to the ceiling in rows that seemed to go on forever, and the floor was covered with salt and blood, and it was just real vibrant and sexy somehow, like organic, and so different than the suburbia. We lived in suburbia of San Francisco at the time, and I always craved the exotic, and yeah, never happy in suburbia.
Well, I mean, it's funny you talk about this. I mean, this materiality of like salt and sweat, but also there's a psychology, this like mental thing you're going for. And I hope I'm not betraying any confidence, but we've talked before in the past about your ability to kind of foretell things, that you have these, you've talked about them in terms of psychic flashes or various times like an empathy, that you can kind of have these moments where you see something coming before it happens. And I feel like that's also important to your work as well as like the physical. Am I right?
Yes, it is something that comes up in my life that always shocks me. It's nothing I've, attempted to perfect or bring out, but it depends, it's just not always there, but I've had some pretty interesting experiences around that, related to time, because like for instance, when I went to Romania on a Fulbright grant, and one morning I woke up and I just had this urge to go to the Natural History Museum, and at 9 a.m, which is kind of crazy, look at rocks. So I did that, and then I came back to my room and I was really exhausted and very anxious, and it was a communist country at the time, so I actually tried to get tickets out of town, but I couldn't because there's a lot of red tape. And that night there was a 8.9 earthquake. So I leave San Francisco and I go to Romania, and there's an 8.9 earthquake. But I sensed it, and I can understand that because animals also sense things like that. But it's a little more difficult for me to understand in an intellectual way, is sensing things that aren't really in the physical world. But anyway, but I've tried to utilize it in a positive way. I have a Buddhist practice, and that helps me kind of make a little more sense of it, or to accept it, or to take advantage of it a little bit more, because if it can kind of disturb your flow of life when this information is coming at you. But I try to put it in my work and make sense of it through the work.
It's a very earthbound form of psychic. It comes from like this empathy you have with other people. It's amazing that it's like the rocks told you the earthquake was going to happen in some ways. Like you're having these dreams and these phenomenological experiences that then you're taking back into your sculpture to really understand. And I think, for me, that's important, I think, in understanding the work. But let's move on to this next piece that we want to talk about, the walkthrough sounding.
Mm-hmm.
And what was it like making this process? Because I think, again, it kind of leads us through the exhibition in a nice way.
Uh-huh. So with sounding, I set up a problem for myself. The problem was, okay, I want to make a sculpture that ingests its surroundings and almost disappears, so that the surroundings would be sucked into the vortex. So I had to figure out how to make a vortex that was reflective, so that would do what I wanted it to do. And I was thinking of it also as a metaphor for entering into some other dimension, a magical place, or like a spiritual quest of some kind, finding that somewhere. To backtrack, when I was 7 years old, I did something really weird for a 7-year-old. So my parents weren't religious at all. My father actually was a devout atheist, but I, for some reason, felt some need to have some sort of spiritual relationship, because there had to be a way to find something that made everything more meaningful. So I actually set about, and I went to all these different houses of worship, every different denomination I could find where I lived. And my parents supported it. They let me do it. They thought it was a little weird, but I did that. And then I came back and realized I didn't really fit into other people's structures, that I really couldn't follow any religious code. So I came home and I invented my own religion, and I think I'm still doing it. So anyway, when you look at this piece from the way you're looking at it now, you might think of it as being like a formalist cube, like relating to Donald Judd, but that is sort of a byproduct of what I was trying to do. I was really concerned with it being an instrument that would change or mutate and make the piece almost disappear or be a secondary to what it was doing with the environment. So you can kind of get an inkling in this photograph of that, because Mesmerize gets mirrored and sucked into the piece. And that also, we set it up and we had to choose, the angle. And I think from playing pool for years, because half of my graduate education occurred in the pool halls. But I think from playing pool, I learned a little bit about spatial interaction and geometry. And so we just started working on it. Remember how we picked this position and we weren't sure, but it ended up, working out.
Completely. I mean, I think it's interesting thinking about these two pieces together. I mean, they should all be thought of together. But Conjunctio, you're making this wonderful thing that has physical presence, but you're thinking about the negative space. And this is a sculpture now that you're really thinking about like optics and perception and illusion, and using sculpture for that. Like, it's very, for me as a curator, it's very playful and non-conventional to see sculpture kind of not being used towards like form, but instead being used almost like you would think about using a painting, which I think comes later. But speaking of optics and visualization, let's, if we can, Zach, skip ahead just a little bit to the next piece in the show, Bandaloop, which this really doesn't photograph super well because it's a giant white cube in the center of the space, and a argument for why you all need to come see this show in person. Many reasons, but this is one of them. Inside this room is a sculpture of Kathy's that she first exhibited in 2014 with Ann Street Gallery in Newburgh. And now that gallery had its own room that Kathy could use to enter into to create this experience. But we had a lot of tricky issues with trying to figure out how to do this during COVID and make it safe for everyone. And I think at one point I was trying to figure out the ontological question of what the difference between a door and a hallway was. I'm sorry to everyone, we had to figure that out. But thank you to the museum staff and helping us come up with a solution, because it really, for me, this is such an important piece to include because it takes the ideas of sounding even further, of thinking of sculpture as this optical immersive space. And but Kathy, maybe elaborate a little bit more what you're thinking through.
Yeah, Zach, do you have a picture of the peephole? I'm not sure where that there.
Yeah.
There's a couple of them. The one that's more blue, maybe. So Bandaloop was also made as a tool. I want to, in this case, I wanted to create a mirage that was related to the idea of levitation, the actual piece that's in the room. I wanted to make it feel like it was about the spirit escaping the body. And for some reason, blue resonates with that idea. So there aren't any ends in this piece, sort of continual loop. The light exists only because of the opposite darkness. So it wouldn't exist in the light of the room. So anyway, in solving this problem, I decided to utilize peepholes because I really like the contrast between high and low, between the idea of the secretive, the illicit, the erotic, and the seductive, and bridging that space of private and public. So in order to make the image come forward through the peephole when you look through one eye, in order to do that and have there be enough there, I had to really become lurid when I was painting the inside of the room. It's extremely overpowering, and that's so funny that I had to make it like almost like a peephole room, the idea of it being the lurid illicitness, in order to get anything there on the outside, because it miniaturizes it. In that miniaturization, it becomes more elusive and more distant and less of a thing. And now the sculptural architectural space of the room, that becomes it becomes an intimate image only when you're looking through with one eyeball. I want to thank my friend David Mann, because I sent him, he saw an image of this people. I think I might have put it on Facebook, and he sent me a section of Blue Nights, which was written by Joan Didion. And I really appreciate that. David's a master at the color blue, by the way. And Didion was also a transplant from California to New York. And she also lived in Sacramento, which I did. So there's a relationship there. And so I'd like to read this little section. In certain latitudes, there comes a span of time approaching and following the summer solstice, some weeks in all, when the twilights turn long and blue. This period of the blue nights does not occur in subtropical California, where I lived for much of the time I will be talking about here, and where the end of daylight is fast and lost in the blaze of the dropping sun, but it does occur in New York, where I now live. You notice it first at April ends and May begins, a change in the season, not exactly a warming, in fact, not at all a warming, yet suddenly summer seems near, a possibility, even a promise. You pass a window, you walk to Central Park, you find yourself swimming in the color blue, And over the course of an hour or so, this blue deepens, becomes more intense even as it darkens and fades, approximates finally the blue of the glass on a clear day at Chartres, or of the Surankov radiation thrown off by the fuel rods in the pools of nuclear reactors. The French call this time of day heure bleue. I'm not sure if I got that pronunciation right. But I feel the same way as she describes about blue. I barely use it in my paintings, occasionally, because it's really kind of a sacred color to me, but I feel more able to use it as a light form.
Wonderful. Yeah, and now if we could skip just ahead a little bit, Zach, because I'd like to talk now about Mesmerize, which expands this field of optics and perception and illusion to a massive scale, which Mesmerize you first exhibited in 2011 at the Grand Rapids Art Museum for Art Prize. And then 2012 with Kazi Contemporary and in Brooklyn. And it's taken a few different forms. Those also involved lenses that you could look through that would kind of bend, so it had a more direct relationship to Bandaloop. But this piece is the largest form of it, and took a team of us installing this over the course of a month. It's a very ambitious installation, and thank you to Bob and Wayne and Anna,
Really?
Eileen. I know I'm leaving other people out, but it was,
no,
yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember everyone.
Yeah.
Well,
It was like the thing. It was the thing that filled up all missing time for all of January for a group of us, was like getting this thing installed. But could you tell us more about Mesmerize and what you're thinking about?
So I began Mesmerize by making one simple ellipse, and I put it on the wall, and I periodically looked at it, and then over the course of the year, I just had a feeling it needed a partner. So I made one more. And then I was sort of stuck on whatever else I was doing in the studio, and I decided, okay, maybe this is meant to be larger. And so it just kept going. And essentially, I decided that it needed to be large enough that if I was standing approximately 10 feet away from it, that the ends of it would be in my peripheral vision. So this is 25 feet wide and has 10,800 individual paintings. So I wanted to make something that you couldn't focus on any one area, or I was trying to make it so you couldn't do that from a distance. And I also wanted to see how many paintings I could make that didn't replicate or repeat any of the others. And it really taught me that individuality is unlimited, that you could keep making things that didn't repeat itself. I also felt like I was making some kind of code, like those kind of codes that they put on packages that allow the machines to recognize what they are. Well, I felt I was doing that. It's kind of signifying something that would unlock some greater truth. And I was also just interested in making this tsunami of color. I think I really rebel against, rules or being forbidden to do things. And I remember in grammar school, I was making a poster about Mexico. We were assigned to make a travel poster about Mexico, and I included every color that you could possibly include, and was told that that was not a good thing to do. And so, you know, many decades later, I tried to prove that poor teacher wrong. So the lack of focus was really critical, not wanting to make it a picture. And, you know, our minds tend to connect the dots, you know, like when we're looking at the stars, we tend to, you know, make animals or creatures and connect dots. So I was careful to control that, to, you know, working with the lights and darks. So that it would be a unique experience and not read in the same way by everyone, that everyone's different kind of consciousness or brain chemistry would have a different relationship with what they see in the piece. So that's what I was attempting to do.
Well, I like it. I mean, I like that you bring up the barcodes or thinking of painting as a code. And then also, it's almost like a collectivist type of painting practice. Like the individual paintings are certainly important, but every time you try to look at one, you expand out to a group rather than a singular. And it's always taking you back to the macro very quickly. It kind of swarms itself out, which I really like as a way of thinking through painting. But going off this, and another transition, if we can move a little bit ahead, Zach. Sorry, we're our timing, but these are wonderful details. But then if you go to the left of the museum, you go to these wonderful paintings, phantasmagorique, which you can almost literally one-to-one view as like scaled up versions of the individual paintings in Mesmerize. And going back to alchemy and psychology, there's a lot going on here. Would you like to talk about this shift into what starts to really become a painting practice?
Well, I had thought for a long time, how can I make these little lips as larger and still retain the same quality of kind of accidental compositional things or accidental resist. And so really I had to devise a method for doing that. And so, you know, I made them in a very complex way, and they're very physical. So I essentially made them in a child's swimming pool, which really wasn't fun to do in winter. It worked out in summer, but so anyway, I filled the pool with water and then would work doing the painting on the surface of the water with a lot of times, you know, materials that would resist or pull away from each other, like utilizing acrylic and oil and spray paint and various other materials. Sometimes I'd put other things in the water that would disturb the flow. And they were really physically challenging because every one of these had several layers, and there's a lot of also room for failure because I had to mask out the exterior and sometimes the water would leak through. And I really didn't want the ground to be part of them because I wanted them to be like objects or sort of sculptural.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, you know, I love these pieces because this is actually those paintings are the first paintings I ever showed of yours. It was how I met you, was through the phantasmagoric paintings in my little gallery I was running out of my studio in Wappingers Falls called Karsten Gorse. But what I loved about them is they seem like paintings that just arrived, like they'd always existed. Like I know there were a lot of decisions that went into making them, and there's this beautiful kind of alchemical practice you had made to make them happen, but they just seemed photographic. Like they had this like quality that they just happened. And I know there's your touch involved in them, but they just seem like paintings that acted almost like photography rather than paintings at times.
Well, I think because in a way I was making emulsions, so it might relate to the photographic process. In my really early years as a sculptor, I utilized photography a lot. And I think there's a relationship, but really what I was trying to do is to make these nuggets of ethereal matter, to make these kind of little Ouroboros.
And they have this wonderful relationship to control. Like you're very tactical and strategic, but also intuitive on the decisions you allow to just happen, and then where you insert yourself as the artist to like finish the thing or make it arrive. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I think as artists, we make decisions every moment, but I'm trying to dig a little deeper than my conscious mind. I trust something else a little bit more than that. So I really steer away from a plan or design, and I try and leave myself open to change. I guess, in a way, music taught me that, and I have an interest in, I love music, and I use it a lot in the studio, and jazz, I love that jazz, or the improvisational jazz doesn't really have a plan or design. And
Bob Dylan.
Pardon?
And Bob Dylan. Jazz and Bob Dylan.
Comes a little later.
No, that you want to talk about that. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, with the, I don't know. I believe in rituals and processes that release some stronger truth. And I think just music, during the last year or two, the last year, the human voice became really important to me. And I normally am quiet in the studio and don't listen to much, but in the last year, because of the situation, I really relied a lot on music and also listening to audiobooks and just the human voice. It's so strange because I hate my own voice, and that's one reason I was nervous doing this, but I think everyone maybe hates their own voice.
I know I do. So let's go across the room now to on the other side of Bandaloop, the other side of the room is there it is, and it's also my background. It's Voyager, which is one of the first just full unapologetic oil on canvas paintings in the exhibition, and I love it, obviously. Well, I love all this work, but it's a wonderful painting, and a painting in a traditional format, but non-conventional forms kind of coming through it. Could you tell us about this process? Because it's very interesting.
Well, this painting probably has 6 months of paintings on it. And, I photographed them as I was going along. And now I look back and, hey, that wasn't a bad painting. And then I covered him up. So I do that sometimes and wonder why I do that. But I think in life we bury a lot of things in our psyche, and then we reveal them again. And so we're constantly going through that process. So this is built up layer upon layer, and the underlying layers were ultimately buried with a semi-transparent layer of porcelain white and mica, because I wanted them to have kind of a sparkle in the ground, and I wanted the cools underneath to be revealed. And then, when I saw that and I saw these buried cool colors, I really decided that the drawing would be really impulsive, or it would be automatic, and that I was trying to create a tension between those bold moves and those buried elements, because I really love extremes. And I wanted the image to reach out, but to also pull you in like a man-eating flower. So I think in some ways it reaches out, but in other ways it has this entropic pull to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, in that archaeology comes across a lot in your work, or this like kind of wresting the image out of some process that you're burying and then taking back. And going back to our mini studio visits, I remember seeing this painting. I love where it arrived at, but I remember seeing this painting at multiple times, or like you said, it was other paintings, and then coming back and seeing it build. And one other, I mean, this is another reason you have to see the show in person, because what I love about this painting is the buildup actually makes the painting more light filled. The ground has this wonderful iridescent color coming through it. And I know Lisa Yuskevich talks about that the figures only has meaning when you have this like beautiful luminous ground that it can operate on. And you've achieved that in this painting. But archaeology, is that the same for you as like this mysticism? How do you, or is it a spiritual practice? How do you talk about, are you comfortable with both or neither, or that you're kind of digging through layers?
Well, I think it's both archaeological and spiritual uncovering. I think they're kind of the same. I mean, like I said, I think in life we bury things, and maybe some adversity. There's always adversity in life, unfortunately. But maybe some adversity makes you want to bury something, or maybe something in my personal life made me not accept that painting, and I covered it, and then I go back to it and try and reinvent it, and then yeah. So. But then when we're humming along without diversity and feel more brave, so that's when I made this move. I felt more brave. And I think life's like that. It is for me. It has a lot of, ups and downs. So anyway, I think I'm just trying to be true to what I'm feeling. And
let's go. Oh, sorry. The lag, it's hard to, I don't want to ever cut you off, Kathy. But let's go around the corner to now talk, I love this wall. This is two of my favorite paintings in the exhibition. And for me, an important part as a curator was seeing these two things, like this was an important first wall for figuring out the show. I'm in love with these two. I don't have fully a language for how to talk about them canonically within art history. They have some relationships to the grid, but just when they start to be very formal, they get funky in a way that I love. But you want to talk about your arrival at these processes, because they also involved a lot of experimentation.
Yeah. So these are actually the two first pieces on stretch canvas in the show. And they're from late 2019. So I was fooling around on the iPad because I was inspired by my wonderful students who were working on Procreate in the classroom. And, I said, what is that program? It looks easier than, Photoshop. And so they showed me a little, and but I'm really obstinate about watching tutorials. I can't bear to watch tutorials. So I just decided I would go with what I could figure out intuitively. And I tried to make the technology human by taking the kind of, I forgot the word where it kind of goes crazy and the image breaks up.
Maybe like a like aberration or glitch. Is that what we're talking about?
Glitch, that's the word. So I really utilized the glitches and until I could find a glitch that resonated with an image that I was interested in. And while I was making this painting, I was doing that on the iPad, and I was also listening to Octavia Butler's reading several of her books or listening to them on Audible that were really prophetic books about sort of the environmental crisis and the political crises. They were supposedly happening right now, but they were written decades ago. So I was listening to one of those books, and the imagery was sort of guiding me. And then together with the iPad, I was finding the truth between the two. And anyway, so the digital, the digital results were one thing, but I'm not interested for myself in like printing a digital image. I really like the physical. So, they're painted in a very physical manner. Visitor, I spent a long time building up the luminous form in the center. And I called it Visitor because I felt like it was something that just arrived out of nowhere. And I felt it was also somewhat alien. So I really wanted it to glow, like it had an inner light. And then Arabesque, that was done in the same method, except for I experimented a little bit more with the paint. I put flour in the blues. So rather than marble dust, I used flour, and then really used a lot of different whites and the raw canvas as well. And I was really trying to get a play between, I'm not that comfortable just relying on figured ground being explicitly defined. I really like it to move back and forth. So that's what I was trying to do in this, to have that blue draw you in, but also be seen as a shape from a certain distance that comes forward.
Well, in Visitor, the painting on the left here, it also, you used airbrush to really make the ground fade far back in space so you could have that beautiful cobalt blue form that sculptural quality. It's exciting form.
Yeah, there's airbrush in Arabesque also in the yellow part. And yeah, I really I really wanted to use a yellow that isn't that familiar. And I don't know why some yellow would be less familiar than another, but for some reason I feel like this isn't a yellow that you see very often.
Yeah, I was just listening to Daniel Richter talk a few weeks back, and he said that like a certain type of yellow, you don't see it in nature, so it's always sculptural. Like when you use it in a painting, it's always like a form of a Hodgkin push-pull, because it's not something you can really relate to as a representational form.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's funny how you talk about it that way.
Oh.
So let's go into the back room now, where we're going to finish up talking about the exhibition. And Kathy and I, over the course of planning this, talked about this room as the drawing room for a long time. And I still think it is. These three paintings really kind of have like a nice formal balance to them. These three squares, which for me was an important moment of seeing past Conjunctio and seeing into this room and seeing this really nice moment. In a Land Where We Never Grow Old is the first painting. Mojos Until Infinity and Vibrations of the Succubi on the right here. But they're paintings, but they also have a relationship to drawing. Both of us have kind of gone back and forth with how we described them. Where did these fall in the process, and what were you thinking about when you were making these?
Well, these were created right after lockdown, and they were really made out of a necessity to find another world to be in. I recognize that the world that I've created is very fragmented, and the details build up and they transform as you move through them. And they're not leading you in any particular direction like a map does, or actually maps don't lead me in any direction. I'm unable to read them for some reason. But I think they do the opposite, really. They try to get you lost, because I'm interested in reverie and keeping one's attention moving and changing. I guess I'm sort of interested in film too, and animation and music, all because they move, or even the rhythm of a book and how it moves. So I'm interested in the energies changing and keeping you engaged with that change, that nothing should be static.
Well, totally. And for me, like, and maybe this is why, even though they're done in paint, they read as drawings in some ways, is they have this wonderful relationship between shape and mark, but also place and space. You know, like they seem like they could be maps, but then right when you start to think that, they kind of just become an Abex or a next generation Abex way of making marks and swirling through space. And they have some relationships to the grid, but not fully. And I think space and place comes up a lot with your work, West Coast, East Coast, but also like you were talking about with Conjunctio earlier, that for the first time with New Pulse, you said, I'm going to plant roots here. And before that, it was kind of this 2 years at a time in different spots. And I see that coming back in these really beautiful paintings and drawings that you were doing, trying to find some place to go to.
Thank you, that's interesting. And then there's something else. I think that space is a strange thing for me in my work, and I'm always trying to figure out space, but not define it as to explicitly what we see with our eyes, but more what we feel. It's kind of like, I kind of associate these three drawings like Braille, kind of, you know, that they have a tactile quality that you can kind of follow that way, rather than get, you know, a solid image. That makes sense.
Completely. And to continue with the drawing room, the last two pieces I want to talk about. Can we turn to the left? We're looking at these three, and then panning to the left. This is maybe the most impromptu, in situ decision of the show. I remember in July, you texted me, then called me about these paintings. You were like, I love my palettes sometimes more than my paintings. Would it be crazy? Would it be crazy to include any of these? And I was like, absolutely not. We have to. And so we formed this little grid of paintings that are based on your palettes. And I think in some ways kind of get close to this Milton Resnick way of all over painting. But what I also get really excited about these is they are based on your palettes, in some cases being them. And you can see these colors reflected in the rest of the show. Like if you look at this grid first, you can see some of the same marks later appear in the front room and in different paintings, because they are this wonderful annotation to what you can expect to see. It's like it's that Infra-Loop again. It's that echo of like seeing things in different spaces. But I want to hear you talk about them too. Sorry, I get excited.
Well, um, uh, so I started using just the paper wax palettes to work on. It just seemed the most expedient thing for me. And then I really liked how the paint moved on the slick surface of the wax palettes. And when I was first doing it, I was like transferring some of the images right from the palette and sticking them onto a drawing. But then I just started to realize how alchemical the nature of paint is. And I came aware of the arena for trying to make the, kind of elixir or uncover the meaning that connects everything just by looking at these palettes and the the way the color changed, the way it would lay on top of next to other colors and change. And I was listening to Octavio Butler, and one of the things that came forth with is change is God. And so when I was listening to that, and I was trying to mix the color in a really unconscious manner and spontaneous and unplanned, and then I started transferring it to actual panels, to use the panels in the same method as I was using the wax palettes. I actually tried to transfer some of the wax palettes directly to a panel, and that they didn't really work. They started to disintegrate pretty quickly, which surprised me. But so anyway, I was really interested in the rhythm between the pieces. And I also wanted to have another grid in the show. So that was the other reason for deciding on a number of them. But in the same, even though they were like spontaneous, they were still very difficult. I think it's a lot more difficult for me to make a small painting than a large painting, to feel my body condensed into a small painting. It's easier if I use my whole body in a large painting. So they were really trying to catch lightning in a bottle, and I threw out a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this took us right up to the show as far as which ones made the grid and which ones didn't. But I also want to bring this up because this makes me think of the way you title works in this very intuitive way. But can you talk about some of the works in this exhibition? Zeitgeist Takes a Nosedive, for instance. How do you arrive at these? Where do they come from?
Well, Zeitgeist Takes a Nosedive. Some of the titles, like, I haven't quite figured out. They just feel right. I don't know that I can explain it, but there's a certain influence I think I have from early comics, like way back from the 1920s and 30s. I really liked the Katzenjammer Kids, and then various other animated Max Fleischer cartoons, and the feeling of energy and the humor. And I've kind of avoided titles and up to this show, really, or I picked very innocuous kind of titles. And so I just decided to try to illuminate some of that past history or influences in the titles. Like the one that's called Slayers of Nirvana, as that painting was largely pastel, and it kind of had a beauty to it, but then I really was being influenced by what was happening in the world. It was last summer, and did this black drawing on top of it, and then I just called it Slayers of Nirvana, because I truly believe that's what was happening in our culture.
Completely. And we're now paused on kind of this beautiful little moment in the back room where you're looking over this sculpture that was made in the same year as Conjunctio in the front room, 1994. So we're finishing off where we began, and right behind it is this grid of paintings based on your palettes. And to the right, we have the maps, the space and place. And this really does finish off as kind of a map room, in my opinion. Like, it's a room for like proposal of the work that you've been doing over the last 20 years now. From a curator standpoint, you think things will look a certain way, but there's always like 10% that you can't know until it's in the place next to each other. And when Primal was put down on this plinth in this room, we were all commenting on just how it reverberated in everything else. This thing made in '94 has a relationship within color and has a relationship within form to everything else around it, and really opens up the show. So poetically, we wanted to end the talk here talking about the first and last piece. But Kathy, do you have anything you want to say about this particular piece, or are we ready to open it up for questions?
I think we're kind of missing the one painting that actually looks a lot like it, which was a total accident. But so maybe we should just open it up for questions.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Zach, do you want to read the questions, or do we have any in the chat?
We do. They're quite great questions, actually. So start from the first. Joseph Loro, and also if you'd like, Joseph, if you'd prefer to unmute yourself, you're welcome to.
Hi, Joe.
Hello. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. Good to see you.
Yes. I had written, do you ever create sculpture that's presented outdoors in public spaces? Do you consider that now, given our current pandemic and moving forward? Do you think about that?
Well, I mean, the sculpture we were just looking at has lived outdoors in my home outside for 15 years. So they're able to survive outside. But yeah, those particular pieces, nature tends to enter in strange ways. You know, nests tend to get made in them, and you know, leaves accumulate. They weren't really made for, they can survive, but they weren't really made to be in that kind of circumstance, but they've held up. Yeah. But yeah, I've made a few things directly outside, like temporary installations. But it's not really a direction I'm that interested in going to.
Got it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we had another question from Zach Seeger, who asked, what are your thoughts about the body and collective consciousness? What is the connection between your work, Jade DeFeo, Lynn Folks, in Paren not being able to be pinned down artistically? What is your body's relationship to nature, being one with nature, a la Joseph Beuys?
My body's relationship to nature. I don't know. Jade DeFeo. Well, Jade DeFeo was one of those mythical, larger than life presences. When I was a student, I heard about her for years from people. And I guess when I met her, I was really struck by her vulnerability and her openness and modesty and intelligence and I guess what I relate to about her is her drive for the work and her, like, she worked on the Rose for 12 years and then she hadn't thought about how she was going to get it out of her building and they had to cut a wall and to get it out of her building. And it was in my studio for years because at the Art Institute, I was in Studio X and it was stored there, as I remember, kind of mounted behind something. So her presence was there even though she wasn't necessarily there. So I guess in terms of, how my work relates to hers, maybe something about the numinous, the interest in the numinous. What's Liz saying in this? I don't know if I answered you, Zach. I'm not sure how to answer the body question. If you rephrase that, or maybe Andrew could answer that. Do you?
I'm
not sure.
I mean, I think if I'm understanding Zach's question, which is wonderful, there's the boys' strategy of like the artist is like part of nature, and there's Lynn Folks not being able to be pinned down artistically, which is to you. So there's some references, but I think the question really is the first question, which is like, what are your interests in this collectivity or this collective consciousness? Because there is like the collective painting thing that happens in Mesmerize, and the collective, I would say the collectiveness of even the back room has a lot of this kind of like opening up to a larger thing than just yourself. Yeah. But if I'm understanding correctly, I don't know, I know Zach's not here because he had to step out, but I think it's more about that individual versus collective, like where you find yourself.
I see. Well, I guess time really interests me because I definitely don't believe it's linear. A lot of my old friends could relate to that with me probably because there used to be a joke about waiting for Goodell, because I get caught up in the moment and then I would be late. But I think time in an instant, any given time in an instant relates to all time before and all time forward. There's some kind of continuum there.
Sorry about that. I had to step away. Are we on the next question?
I think there's quite a few that are popping up that I'm not able to catch. But.
JD had asked a question, and JD's still here. Do you want to?
Hi, yes, I'm still here. Actually, I'm Jasmine Orpilla from Los Angeles. Hi. Congratulations, the show is so beautiful, and I did type a rather long question. If you can hear me okay, I can just tell you now.
Absolutely, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm speaking on behalf, well, not on behalf, but I just love to hear more about your thoughts about technology and how current generations don't have the same kind of organic connection that you do with the art history in New York City, for example. And how do you see the intimacy and technology, rather, do they even meet nowadays with the internet culture that we have today? She said, my personal opinion is that we're losing that sense of intimacy. I like to share in common with you this sense of using the intuition, but it's so pervasive, this internet culture, and how it just it informs perception, and so what are your thoughts on today and technology?
Ugh. I would say ugh. No, I mean I have difficulties, really difficulties with it. I think because I didn't grow up with it. But I think also the younger generation, and from talking to students, they're really not on board with, you know, how all pervasive it is. Although I think there's like these addictions to our phones and other things that are kind of disturbing, like how that can affect your psychology. Is that sort of what you're asking? I'm not sure.
Yeah, because just from the artistic point of view, because I think it affects your, just the way that you perceive and the way that you create. If your mind, if you've grown up in a generation where the internet was already in existence, and you grow up, like I see babies and children with iPads like already, you know. And so when we're talking about, you know, earlier generations where people are more organic and intuitive, and they touch the work and they see the work and they go in person to places and they have a real experiential connection to the work,
Right.
like
Okay.
I just see that it affects.
I kind of understand what you're getting at. Well, because I've been teaching remotely for the last year and a half, I think it is, or maybe it's just been a year, seems like longer. And seeing my students work over Zoom, basically. I just went in to see it in person the other day, and it was so vastly different. I was kind of shocked at what we miss, like seeing something remotely and then seeing it in the flesh. There's a distinct difference there, you know, in what's conveyed. But I'm not even sure if I'm getting what you're.
I guess without loading the question too much, is like, are we losing soul in creating artwork today due to technology? Do you think so? Because I see a lot of spirit and soul in your work, and I really feel that you come from a place of intuition. But if you look today, I feel like maybe, I hope I'm not projecting, but I wonder whether we're losing soul. And I'm not talking from a religious point of view, of course.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I love my students. I think they're really soulful. So I'm not worried about them in that way, but I understand what you're saying. And I understand that, you know, we could be going down that path into a very automated and robotic and strange reality. Yeah.
I think too, to jump in real quick, I mean, here's where I like work the crowd, because I know everyone's on this opinion already. But this is a show that a lot of people have only been able to experience online. Boo. And what we love about this show is there are moments that appear as images, but it has to be seen in person. The painting virtually behind me that makes my hand do weird stuff, like the ground of it glows, and the bandaloop piece needs to be seen. And so there is, obviously we need to get the show out in a lot of different ways. And I know everyone is still of the opinion here that art is a social thing, that art is an embodied thing, that art needs to have an experience, that we see it together in person to really track with it. But I do think it's difficult to work with some people who can confuse the image circulating with the experience of seeing the thing itself.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and congratulations again, Kathy.
Oh, Jasmine, thank you. And yeah, I'll be in touch. I wanted to talk to you about your work, and you're having some great success. And what's that contraption in front of your face?
Oh, that's a microphone. That's me in studio making recordings. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, yes, thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Zena wants to congratulate you on your beautiful fluid exhibit. The show makes perfect sense. But if you'd like to unmute, you can say it yourself out loud.
Kathy, you're just the best. And
Hi, Zena.
hi. And it's been a long time since you taught me so much about art.
What year was that?
96, 7, 8, I think.
Uh-huh.
And but I'm realizing how big an influence you had on my psychology and philosophy around art.
Oh,
And I think it was one that we shared initially, but you definitely threw a lot at me as far as information and knowledge and perspectives that other people were talking about. And what I think excites me always, but maybe most about this show, is the spiritual, mystical, magical element that courses through it, and how that's beginning to be an okay conversation to have around art and with art, and that it is a process of psychic and psychological evaluation that we do on ourselves so that we can function, is how I do it.
and it has been, I think it has been somewhat taboo for years.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's starting to, the irrational, supposed irrational side of things is becoming, since we're seeing that the rational supposedly is working so well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good to see you.
And that addressing also that struggle to balance the male and female, and that being one of a big query, I would say, considering that piece. And also, I think as feminist women making art in a mostly predominantly man's world, there's the impulse to lean into the masculine parts of ourselves and push that and like make our way with that leading us. But meanwhile, I feel like, major parts of our value come through our feminine, and I don't know. I just watched you balance them both really well.
I think it's interesting that now young men are kind of opening up to the opposite. Yeah. And I think that's a good thing, because we have both within us,
Yeah. Yep. Thanks so much. Can't wait to see it.
Great
And
to
you.
see you. June 13th, big party with music and everything.
Wonderful. Love that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
So Daisy, who has left, also just says, great to hear you talk about the work, gorgeous show, and she's looking forward to seeing it in person.
Right.
And Elizabeth, who's a contributor to the catalog.
Yeah. Where are you? Is she going to come forward?
I hope so. I mean, not to put you on the spot, Elizabeth, but if you'd like to unmute yourself, you're welcome to.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Kathy. Hi, Judy. Hi, Andrew. I wrote in the chat, I loved it when you said, and you said it several times, years later, I realized that what I was really doing, and then you would tell us what you were really doing. And I loved that. I love what happens when time goes by and you look back on work that you made and what you realize, because I'm sure it's happened to all of us, hasn't it? That we've all had these epiphanies. We thought we were doing one thing. We were all carried away by our intent and our idea, and then realized later how little control we really had and how much was coming out that we had no idea was coming out. And you can't find that unless you keep doing it, it's otherwise you won't recognize it. And
yeah, that's true. Takes a lifetime.
Yeah. So I loved how you talked about that. I just want to hear more. I know that we're running out of time, and that I think time, my husband Carlton talks about time entering into the life of the work. I have always loved that phrase, and I really thought about that today as you and Andrew were talking, in your wonderful, detailed, zoom in way of each piece. I just want to add that too. This has really been a delicious artist talk on Zoom because of that video and the fact that we can hear you speaking and then watch the camera, at least see the pieces closely. And
thank you.
Thank you.
And your essay was so illuminating about everything, and I can't believe your memory and how good it is about. I didn't remember the blood spilling under the wall episode.
Well, I kept, it was such a Larry Moe and Curly moment when we all collided with each other trying to get out of the building during that earthquake. And
That I don't remember either. Maybe because I'd been in a bigger one and it wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was no big deal. Maybe you weren't there. Maybe you were still back in your studio working.
I don't know.
Thank you so much. This was, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to see you. You look great.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
I'd like to throw in real quick with Elizabeth's question because, I might get a little bit of this perspective working with Kathy, but like when we were talking about, over the last few weeks, what we wanted to discuss in the exhibition, there was like a part where she was talking about a sculpture and she was like, this kind of gets at the isolation of the pandemic. And I was like, Kathy, you made this 4 years ago, like pre-pandemic. And I presented the solid structure that was saying like time is a linear progression, like we shouldn't say it, but she's right. Like, and a lot of this work, like you just said, Elizabeth, the life of the work exists and continues to have conversations with the world as it goes. And so something from 30 years ago or 20 years ago can be about the things now. And I found myself being proved wrong by saying like, I don't think it is about that because you made it before. But of course, what we talked about, Infra-Loop, the thing exists before the thing at times. The premonitions are very important. And I think the fluidity of her time is what makes this exhibition have to happen now for me.
Thank you.
Beautiful. We have the glorious Linda Montano, who you spoke about seeing types. I think it was Tetching Say. Hi, Linda. I see you're still here. If you want to unmute, you can. She said, the egg.
Why do I use that shape? The egg?
I think that's the question, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not absolutely sure, but it feels like the nugget, the nugget of what's left, maybe when we leave, it still exists, or, it's I think a representation of the soul. And also it kind of came about with, after I made Mesmerize, which utilized that shape. And the first incarnations of that had lenses hanging in front of it. And I made a lot of work photographing through the lenses into Mesmerize. And I realized that it kind of relates to the shape of a lens or our eyeball, and also interested in like a mandorla shape, and yeah, but the egg. I've noticed it comes up in a lot of people's work. I don't know if Heather, my student, is here now, but she's always talking about the egg in her own work. Maybe she's not here.
Nini or Nene.
Neen.
Okay. Humphrey. I think is not here anymore. Just again, it's wonderful to see the work and hear about your process and thinking over time. And loves that you keep opening out onto new explorations and asking new and interesting questions. And I think that's a really true. And Judith, who is still here.
Hi, Judy.
Hi.
Oh, hi.
This has been so great to hear you talk about the work in in the gallery. I can't wait to get there.
I know, we gotta get up.
Should be soon.
Yeah.
So I've been totally amazed all along. I mean, we've been friends for a really long time, and you're so much a part of my inner conversation with art in general. I can't say enough about that. But when I saw you morph from a sculptor to a painter, I have been truly amazed that you didn't drag all of art history with you. Hats off to you. In your talk, when you're talking about the work, you never use the word composition or I don't know, progress or and I've always been in awe at your ability to focus on your own experience. And that really was obvious to me through your metamorphosis into a painter, in that you were so focused on the materiality and the characteristics of the actual paint in a way no other human being that I've ever known has been able to focus on that.
Really?
I used to think, she thinks she's a painter. She's still a sculptor.
That's so funny.
Because your focus on the material was so complete. But there is, for me, I think there is some kind of tradition that you relate to. Do you ever, in your secret moments, think about what those traditions might be?
Well, it's funny because, I mean, I really love art history, and there's so many different periods of art that I am really in awe of. And, but I don't follow I'm not able to follow the rule book. Like, I can't watch a tutorial, I can't follow directions, I still can't get my Apple TV to function correctly. I think I'm just really right-brained. And I really didn't have any training in painting, although I started off in painting. They told me I couldn't do what I wanted to do, which was to cut holes in the canvas and build appendages off of it. And they said I couldn't do it. So I went to sculpture, but I think the whole time I was a sculptor, I was like trying to make a painting with the materials.
I've never heard you talk about the history of sculpture either, come to think of it.
I know a lot less about the history of sculpture, I think, than I do about painting. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, do you ever think of yourself in a continuum somehow artistically? Or are you thinking about yourself as a maker in some completely other context?
I feel like I'm a conduit, and you know, I don't really have that decision to make.
Back in the 70s, you were very involved with this book, Architecture with Architects.
Right, right.
And I'm wondering, you know, if there's like a bigger platform than the artist and you know, your relationship to art history that you're thinking about.
Well, that Architecture Without Architects, that was, yeah, mainly from indigenous cultures and them sort of making their structures out of what was available. And yeah, I think it, again, it's the necessity to create an image, or the necessity to create a home, you know, where you don't have a choice. So you're overwhelmed to the point of, you know, you have to get it out. And
right, so you're not working, you know, making paintings for the king or making a sarcophagus to go in a particular, it's about survival.
It is. But it's not just about my survival, because I feel like I'm talking to a cross across time in some way. I don't know if it'll ever reach that, but it's not about me. I try to get me out of the way as much as I can, me being the ego or.
You really, yeah, that holds true looking at the work. I don't immediately think of it as being particularly autobiographical.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think of it as being very in the moment.
Yeah, it is. That's in the moment, you know. Yeah. So, you know, I was really concerned having this show, to be quite honest, that it was going to include sculpture and painting over those decades, that it wouldn't relate, because I'd never seen it together in a room. So I was really happy to see that I'm not a totally different person now than I was, you know, 30 years ago. That just being said in a different way.
I think what allows that is like what Judy brought up too, or what people are sensing is like, in a wonderful Kathy Goodellian way, the sculptures are optical and illusionistic and more painterly, and the paintings are materialist and thinking about sculpture. And so you know, it's thinking of painting as a sculptor, thinking of sculpture as a painter. And I think there's a better word for it. I can't think of it right now, but I'm like trying to rack my brain, but I keep coming to like epigenetic, that you're more interested in like forms that have always existed in the ether than you are in like some type of like aesthetic language. It's more of like the pathos formula of like seeing these things, these phantom forms that we get from like however many thousands of years ago,
Right.
that we see everywhere.
Right. So I read something the other day that I think is some kind of new discovery that they made about the people that were doing the cave paintings that were really deep in the caves. I don't know if anyone else read this, but there's obviously no light at all in those caves. And so they were using fire to paint by, and they so were deprived of oxygen. And that they were taken to another place, you know, like kind of a hallucinogenic place when they painted those. And I don't know, I just loved it. It has nothing to do with anything, but yeah.
So it looks like in the chat, there's one more question from Michael. If you want to ask, you're welcome to.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Michael.
It's fun. You know, I've only seen your work on Instagram and Facebook.
I know, you're in Kansas, right?
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, it's a wonderful job of curation because I finally see the threads through your work.
Yeah, that's Andrew. He did a great job.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. Yeah, you know, I spend a lot of time, I doodle all the time. Do you doodle all the time?
No.
Are you thinking through these things? Or are you physically doing stuff with them on a daily basis?
Well, I created, I'd say 3/4 of the show in a year. So that was pretty daily, like 10 hours a day. Yeah. I'm not really a doodler. I kind of doodle in my head. Yeah. I have been at various times, you know, doodled a lot, but not, yeah, I tend to work a lot, although I've tried to take a little break the last couple months. And I noticed that I need to get back to the studio because it keeps me a lot healthier mentally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's great. I've been working on this expressionism thing with Colin Goldberg through the Pollock Krasner House. And
say that again, I kind of bleeped out.
Expressionism.
Yeah.
and it's all digital, and your work is so human. And the problem that I've had with new digital work is that it doesn't have any soul. There's very little, there are very few tactile elements about it. But in your play on those paintings and converting what you did in cuneiform and then transferring that to a canvas, really bridged that gap well for me. You have the same kind of sense of digital art being, they're trying to, I get a sense that they're trying to remove the artist from the artwork.
Yeah. You mean with the new, with what do they call that? The
NFT.
Non-fungible tokens.
Yeah. I'm still trying to catch up on getting that, but yeah, well, I think it's just a tool, you know, and you know, it can be, you can take it and then put it through your digestion and humanize it. You know, I humanized it by not understanding its brain and not understanding how it functions and imposing my own,
Great.
not following the rules of how to utilize it.
Yeah, I'm not good at that either. Well, thank you. Beautiful show.
Thank you for coming. Good to see you.
Absolutely. I wouldn't miss it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's all of the questions from the chat, Kathy. If anybody else wants to unmute, you're welcome to. You have until July 11th to come and see the exhibition at the museum.
Tell them about June 13th too.
And on June 13th, we will have, oh my gosh, Kathy.
Paul McMahon.
Paul McMahon, thank you. A musician, and you know, hopefully most everybody will feel a little safer being in public and around people, especially if you've been vaccinated. And yeah, I mean, come then, come before then, come many times to see the show, honestly.
The show will be open, and then there'll be outdoor tents for, you know.
And I would say just thank you, Kathy. This has been a, for me, working at the museum and spending almost every day in the exhibition, you get to really go deep into the artwork. And the wonderful thing I found about the paintings, especially for me, is there are things that reveal themselves very slowly. Mm-hmm. And then I was sitting at the desk the other day, and one of our gallery attendants was nearby, and I was like, oh my God, like I just saw this thing that just popped out of the canvas that I'd been staring at for, you know, months. And that's such a special.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Yeah, I like to make it take a little bit of time, you know. And yeah, that one that you were talking about kind of unfolded like a book.
Yeah, it did. It was like a book.
Yeah. Joseph Lauro just asked what time the June 13th event would happen. Do you think probably 11 or 12 or something?
Yeah, probably early afternoon. There'll be more information on our website once we get details finalized. Sorry, I was a little vague about it. It's not completely fleshed out yet, but it'll be up on the programs page soon with more information, Joseph.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming and asking such great questions. Oh, I think Jisoo asked a question.
I think Jisoo is hoping to stay with you when they come to see the show.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Anyways, thank you everybody so much.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for the great questions. Thank you, Zach, Andrew.
Thanks everyone.
Great job, Kathy. Great job, Andrew.
Great, thank you.
Wait a minute. Oh, okay. Bye.